Good afternoon and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court and child protective services issues along with parental alienation. I'm your host, Marion Petrie, and today I have a guest overseas, all the way from Ireland. His name is Kenn Joyce. He is a spokesman for Alienated Children First, and he's going to talk about how he has 28 counties with the legislature regarding parental alienation. And I guess in Ireland, they need 2 more counties to go. I'm going to let Mr. Joyce explain more, but we're going to also talk about parental alienation. And this takes place when one parent, through their actions and behaviors and attitudes, cause a child to be alienated from the other parent. So good afternoon, Mr. Joyce.
Very good afternoon to you, Marianne. How are you?
Okay, how are you doing?
Good. COVID-free.
That's good, and that's the way to be. So you've been doing a lot of work with getting these counties.
Well, I suppose the big dilemma for Ireland was that nobody knew what parental alienation was. I guess, you hear anecdotally of how, a husband and a wife split up and one of the parents turns the other parent against the kid, and you kind of think, oh yeah, well, that'll last for a month or two and the kids will always come back to the parents. You don't really think anything of it. And then you discover parental alienation, and, which is a multi-generational disorder. And you realize that there's a whole new dimension to this thing, which, has been linked to the latest research we have shows that 10% of suicides in Ireland are directly related to parental alienation. So it's a very serious issue, and one that until relatively recently did not enjoy a name even. People didn't know what to call it. Mm-hmm. So you had all these people coming out of the woodwork saying, no, we split up 10 years ago and I haven't seen my kid since then. And suddenly people are thinking, what is this now? This is really not good for the kids. And that is the focus that we take, i.e. the children, and hence the name that we chose for ourselves, Alienated Children First. So the organization has been around for nearly 2 decades, but in terms of Alienated Children First, we rebranded as that just last year and took on a whole new influx of people who were very keen to, number one, educate the general public and in particular the judiciary as to what parental alienation is and how it is different from a child not wanting to see a parent because they have very good reason for not wanting to see that parent, such as an abusive parent, for instance, and what they can do about it, I suppose, from a judicial point of view. So we looked to the UK, and we looked. I mean, the States has probably led the world since the work of Dr. Gardner in the 1950s and 60s, who pioneered it through Craig Childress's work in the last couple of decades. But yet, parental alienation is still relatively unknown, certainly by that title, and most definitely in terms of the damage it does on this side of the big pond.
Right. And so, like, when you did the study on the suicides, how did you come across a percentage?
Well, therein lies another rub, because unfortunately, in Ireland, as I imagine, in a lot of countries, court proceedings are covered by a form of judicial privilege known as the in-camera rule, which means that you're not allowed to discuss what happens in court outside of court, as a result of which people reporting to their psychologists that I'm feeling suicidal, etc., could not ever go on record making such reports. Neither could the psychologist. Therefore, any kind of information that we got had to be gleaned purely circumstantially and purely anecdotally. So the way that we did it was we spoke to all of the groups here that look after people who help people when they are close to suicide, and to psychologists who specialized in this area, and to psychologists who specialized in parental alienation. And we asked them, what percentage would they put on it, and they came up with that number almost unanimously at 10%. They said about 10% of the people that end up committing suicide, it is a direct result of parental alienation in one form or another. So again, trying to get any kind of information which you can prove numerically is very, very difficult, and even finding the stories behind why it happened is very, very difficult, and even finding people who are prepared to discuss it is very, very difficult, because again, everyone is fearful and trepidatious when dealing with the potential of being in contempt of court for disclosing something which could ultimately end up being covered by the in-camera rule. And the in-camera rule is also improperly used on a very regular basis to gag people and to gag even court orders. I know of one case where the court found a case of parental alienation, and they handed down an order stating that this is a case of parental alienation, etc., etc. And the person involved had been accused of having sexually abused his children. He had been accused of beating his children, tying them to chairs, locking them up in rooms. So he was very keen to vindicate himself. And when this order was handed down, he showed the order to the principal of his children's school by way of vindicating himself and saying, well, look, see, it wasn't me. It was parental alienation that was going on here, and I didn't do any of these things. And he ended up back in court for showing an in-camera document. And therefore, he was the school was told to disregard the information, return the order, and the individual involved has no recourse now to try and explain to anybody that he's not guilty of the defamatory information which has been spread about him. And the person involved came to us because he was very close to suicide. He said, I can't walk down the street. People all think I'm a pedophile. They think I've beaten my kids. And I can't do anything about it. And if I try to prove I'm innocent, I'm in breach. I'm in court on charges of being in contempt of court, which means they can lock me up in jail. So I just have to take it on the chin and not say anything about it. And that's the kind of judicial problem that is easily enough remedied. But unfortunately, the lawyer's job is to get their client off the hook. And if they can get their client off the hook by finding that the order must be held in camera and cannot be disclosed to anybody, well, then the lawyer is doing their job by insisting that that rule be employed. However, the effect of the law in that particular instance is contrary to what its function was originally designed to be. But that's a pretty classic example of some of the things that need to change. The first thing that we feel needs to change is that people identify parental alienation as a form of child abuse, and that it is perpetrated using coercive control. And if we can convince the powers that be to accept those 2 points in circumstances where the coercive control legislation is already in place. We therefore don't even need any additional legislation. We just need parental alienation to be recognized as a form of coercive control, and therefore the legislation is already in place. And as you know, countries like Mexico, if you're found guilty of parental alienation, there it comes with a maximum 10-year jail sentence. Even Italy, closer to home here, has it's a criminal offence to parental alienate children, because of course the victims are the children, but they won't show the signs of it for years. But when they do show the signs, they will be lifelong, and they will be very, very serious. And again, all of the psychologists to whom we speak say that they are things as serious as self-harming and substance abuse, and in extreme cases, suicide. We had a baroness in the House of Lords last Tuesday, whose name escapes me at the moment, and she testified to the fact that she knows of a case where a 15-year-old boy, Baroness Lady Mayer was her name, and it was on Tuesday, the 5th of January. If you want to Google that, you'll see it in the House of Lords. She gives a very succinct description of what parental alienation is, and how it is not domestic violence, as some try to pass it off as, or use parental alienation as an excuse for trying to get off a domestic violence charge, which is another horrendous issue that we have to deal with. But in her speech to the House of Lords, she explains that she personally knows of, I think it was a 15-year-old boy who ended up committing suicide because of parental alienation. So it is serious, it is devastating, it is multi-generational, and it is almost unheard of. And those that do know about it simply try to brush it under the carpet. And I hate to say it, but when I ask the pragmatists in my life, why does this go on? They all simply say, follow the money.
That's what we're saying over here too, in our country. And there's incentives for, a custodial parent, and so much damage is done. And we're just also trying to get the courts to listen, and the judiciary is a kind of a problem to get them to listen to you. Have you talked to many judges at all?
Our experience is that the judges simply do not want to hear. By the very function of the bubble in which they exist all the time, they are shielded from the harsh realities of life in many respects, and they live in this kind of ideal world of law and order, but they can sometimes be excluded from real life in our experience. And a lot of them in this country are simply of the opinion that children are better off with their mother, and that's all there is to it. And of course, that goes back generations. And there was a time when, a woman's place was in the home, and a man's place was to go out and provide for the family and come home to his dinner on the table, and that was the way it was. And Ireland was horrendous in that regard, in its abject negligence in terms of its responsibility to the rights of women. And it, for instance, did not allow women to vote. I mean, it was the same in the UK and most of the world, hence the suffragettes, etc. But even more recently than that, women were not allowed to own property in their own names. It had to be in the husband's name. So if you're the daughter or the son of of a woman who gave out about these things in the 1950s, as being grossly unfair, and quite rightly gave out about them. But if you're that child now and you're a high court judge, you still have that programming which tells you, yes, women get treated very badly. And it's kind of, in some cases, it's a bit like the pendulum has swung too far the other direction now, and men are being persecuted in court. That said, when it comes to the specific case of parental alienation, we find that the people who contact us are in equal number women. So parental alienation is something which affects both sexes equally, but the courts do seem to have a bias in favor of the mother should be the one that takes care of the children. And I guess that's just historical and something which will take time to change in a legal society, which is not very quick to change as a general rule.
Yeah, we need to get some things changed because these kids are suffering. And I've been in court myself, and I have had my two kids taken away based on false accusations. And that was the silver bullet that did my case in, on top of the judge and the opposing attorney being in collusion. And also my ex-husband's wife worked in the courthouse. So my cards were stacked against me, and they knew what they were doing. And I'm sure you run into these problems as well over in Ireland.
What you've outlined there, unfortunately, is a story that we hear far too often, and it raises a number of very specific questions. Number one would be, what happens when somebody makes false allegations about somebody else in court? What is the punitive action that the court then takes? Because that's one of the big problems over here, is that even when someone is found to have made the most horrendous accusations, which are completely false and proven to be false, and therefore the person has committed perjury and the person has defamed, the victim is not allowed to defend themselves, because to do so would be to breach the in-camera rule. And the punitive action taken by the courts against the perpetrator of the perjury and the false allegations is zero. And the typical response from the judge is, well, what would you have me do? Put the father of the child in jail, or the mother of the child in jail? Well, this argument was raised what year did Bob Geldof make his super documentary, I Love That Dare Not Speak Its Name, Geldof on Fathers? I think that was about 2002 or something like that. And he raised this very point, that the judges keep telling him, well, what do you want me to do if your wife breaches the orders, Mr. Geldof? Do you want me to put the mother of your children in jail? And his response was, yes, I do. Put them in jail for an afternoon and then see if they do it again.
Right. I mean, or even fine them. Why not fine them?
Yeah.
Like
Well,
$2,500.
We had a former Minister for Justice here, Alan Shatter was his name, and he introduced new legislation. He was a family lawyer by trade, and he could see all of these gross inadequacies in the legislature. And he introduced an act in 2015 designed to overturn some of the ridiculous practices and remedy some of the others. And one of his remedies was that there should be financial reparation for misconduct in court. There should be financial reparation for parents who don't allow court-ordered access, for instance. And what he suggested was, if one parent or the other refuses court-ordered access, firstly, time should be given in lieu, and secondly, the person who committed the offence should be fined. And the powers that be here refused the second suggestion. They accepted the fact that, yes, you can give time in lieu, but that's again at the discretion of the judge. It's not automatic. And his suggestion that people be fined for breaching the court orders was rejected. And as long as you have court orders that are optional, they're not really very effective, are they?
Mm-mm. Well, even over here, the same thing was happening. Like the judge would order that I could pick the kids up at, say, 4 p.m. And I would drive over with my dad and we'd pull in the driveway and the lights are on, but nobody's home. And this went on like the whole summer. And he was in contempt of court multiple times, but this judge obviously did not do anything at all. He would probably give him a talking to, and then that would be it. And the behaviors would still continue.
It's really terrible. And of course, you know, it's your poor kids who end up growing up without the maternal love that's there, ready and waiting clearly for them.
Right. And that's, you know, people can co-parent if they've got a normal ex, you know, one that will work with you. Because I've seen it done with other families that, you know, there was a divorce. This is, you know, it's a sad situation, but the exes work together. And
one of the things that we've discovered here from all the psychologists who report into us is that in the case of most family breakups, for whatever reason, you still end up with two responsible parents and a bunch of kids who need both of them. And the two parents, whether they like each other or not, they realize that the kids need two parents, not one. And they will swallow their pride, if you like, and put aside their differences for the good of the kids. Most normal people would do that. Mm-hmm. People who parentally alienate their children, therefore, have been reported to me repeatedly from very qualified psychologists as suffering from personality disorders. Mm-hmm. And when I ask, well, what do they suffer from, or what motivates them to behave like this, they simply say, well, you could not in your right mind think that it is good for a child to grow up with a loving parent that they are not allowed to have unfettered access to. And therefore, if you believe that, you have to be suffering from a personality disorder of some sort. And therefore, nobody who subjects their child to parental alienation can be considered to be fully mentally capable or emotionally capable, because you simply wouldn't do that to a kid if you had your full mental faculties about you.
You know, and I know, you know, it's over here, everyone wants 50-50 shared parenting. And, you know, you should start off with 50-50 shared parenting. And like I did with my ex, and things were going okay until I introduced him to an acquaintance, but I was not sure if she worked I really don't know where she worked, but I found out later. But when she came into the picture, then I noticed like my oldest behavior changing. And I didn't know what to make of it, because I thought, well, you know, the kid's growing up, they're trying to get independent, even as a 10 or 11-year-old, but you just don't know what to, you know, the parental alienation is so insidious.
It absolutely is. And, you know, we have parents, for instance, who fight through the courts for years and years and years, simply to be allowed have their own child's telephone number, because the kid's got a mobile phone, but the father or the mother won't allow the other parent have the number. And finally, court orders are handed down that the other parent should have the child's phone number, and the parent receives the phone number only to discover that the parent's number and all of his family's number or her family's numbers are all blocked on the kid's phone. So you try to ring the kid and it just goes straight to voicemail. You send him a text, he doesn't see it. But they have complied with the order, because the order didn't say you got to let the kid speak to his grandparents and his mother and his aunties on the phone. It said you got to provide the phone number, and that has been complied with. Therefore, there's no breach of the order. And these are, again, foolish little loopholes, which, the judges do have the discretion to change if they choose to, but they simply don't. They say, well, I handed down an order telling such and such that they should give the other party the court order, and they did it. So I can't be held responsible if the child chooses to block the number. Then, of course, you bring in a whole another slew of, well, hang on. Since when does an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decide whether or not they speak to their parent? Is that a child's decision? Is a child grown up enough at 8 or 10 years of age to decide whether or not they will choose to speak to their parent? Well, I wouldn't have thought so. I would have thought kids, especially younger kids, they need a parent to tell them what to do, not to as an optional extra should they choose to favor the parent with communication.
Right. And I just can't believe, well, like with the blocking of the phones, like I was given a court order where the judge wrote no contact via iPhone, iPad, landline, and no holidays. And that's alienating a parent. He was also assisting in the parental alienation because they all knew each other. But that destroyed my kids. And this is time you'll never get back. And a lot of people don't understand. If you go to try to explain it to people, they may have a happy family and nothing happened to them. But this is happening to a lot of people I'm talking to. And I don't know, even like the judiciary, I've offered to talk to 2 judges and they shut me down. And I'm going to keep trying. But, how hard was it to get 28 counties to agree with all of this?
Not very hard at all. Once we had the opportunity to explain to them what it was, what it does, and what needs to be done. The problem was simply one of education, because once you explain to people what parental alienation is, what it does, and what we can do to fix it, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you allow something like that to go on unchecked? Of course, people should, yeah, but it takes crusaders to get out there and stick their head above the parapet and be prepared to get shot down in court. And don't forget, there is a large number of vested interests who don't want you stopping parental alienation, because if parental alienation comes with a criminal offense and then therefore it gets stopped, well then sure, what are the mothers trying to see their kids they can't see, or the fathers trying to see their kids they can't see? What are they going to go to court over? And where will the barristers get all of the money? And where will the solicitors and the attorneys and the lawyers, or whatever name you put on these legal professionals, where are they all going to get paid?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a very sad indictment on our species that at this stage we are still but adolescents. And unfortunately, we are. And that is something that we are working hard to come to terms with, again, as a species, because our instincts are those of animals, and our emotions and brains are governed by those instincts, but our intelligence has leaped, you know, quantum leaps ahead of the instincts that were built up over millions of years, designed to basically teach us that snakes are dangerous and don't get eaten by a tiger or a mammoth. So we have this dilemma, and it's one, again, which it simply requires education. But when, of course, you get people seeing the opportunity to make money, they're very happy to do that, because they've got their own kids to look out for, and if they're not breaking the law and they're able to make lots of money, well, sorry, why wouldn't I do it? That's what the game is all about, is providing for your own kids. And that's why we need responsible government, and responsible government has the power to issue the legislation to control these circumstances. However, the people that get into government, usually with the best intentions in the world, are corrupted by the reality of the fact that, there's no point being in a government that's not in power. And if you want to get into power, then you have to do favors for this guy. And then, I won't even touch on the subject of your current president over there, and how he came into power, and perhaps mightn't be in it for much longer. But politics is an imperfect game, and it's the politicians who ultimately run the judiciary, and the judiciary is also an imperfect game. It doesn't always, Nelson Mandela's famous words were, "Well, Your Honor, along with great power comes great responsibility, but also some discretionary power." And it is that discretionary power where typically we find people's personal feelings being executed in courtrooms. And those personal feelings, of course, are motivated by society in general and its perception of things, and what kind of an upbringing that particular human being had, because judges are human beings first and judges second, for the most part. So yeah, look, it's an imperfection along the way in our system. It's one that I think is gaining ground worldwide. People are starting to say, well, hang on, family law courts just don't work anywhere in the world. They're wrong. They're not up with the times. They were legislated for many decades ago. The legislation needs to be brought up to speed. The rules and regulations need to be up to speed. If someone breaches a court order, well, then they should be punished for it. It doesn't have to be a very lengthy custodial sentence, but that custodial sentence should be there, or, as you suggested, at least a fine, neither of which exists in Ireland. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but certainly here they don't exist. The worst you can expect is a slap on the wrist,
right?
And it's just not working.
Right, because these judges are not holding that parent accountable. And then when you try to, I was a pro se litigant, which I was representing myself, trying to hold the judge accountable, it's just a nightmare. I mean, I can see why parents are disheartened and committing suicide, because there's no remedy at law for this problem of family court.
No, you get given the runaround. You spend all your money trying to get to see your kids so that your kids can have a balanced upbringing, and eventually you run out of money. You've probably lost your job along the way, or you're unable to function in a high paying environment. So you end up as a lay litigant, we call it over here, representing yourself in court. And the the law is an ass, as the old expression
Mm-hmm.
goes. And if you know how the ass works, well, how are you going to, how is you, how are you as a lay litigant ever going to, without the understanding of how the ass works, how are you possibly going to control it? You can't. And therefore you will always lose. And um, I'm reminded of the first case I was ever involved in Australia, when this guy had ripped off money, but I hadn't reported it on time. And the court said, well, unfortunately, Mr. Joyce, you seem like a very nice young man, but you didn't report this on time. So technically, this guy didn't commit the crime, and therefore I have to find in his favor, and he's going to keep your money, and you don't have it back. And I, of course, was trying to save money like you, and I didn't think a solicitor would be necessary. And I thought maybe if I bring a solicitor, I'll be seen to be too antagonistic and aggressive. And the judge said, well, Mr. Joyce, let me tell you something about the courts. It's not about justice. It's a game of chess played by lawyers. And if you come in here without a lawyer, well, they're simply not in the game, and you're not going to win. And that's why you have lost here today. So let it be a lesson to you in future. Never go into court without legal representation. And it was very, very wise words. However, it is sometimes difficult to find attorneys and lawyers and barristers who are prepared to go into court without being paid.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're put into a circumstance where you're unable to pay for them, you are therefore forced to have no legal representation. And when one party has legal representation and the other doesn't, that's a David and Goliath to start with. That's a totally unfair playing field, and it should never be allowed to happen. But it does. It happens all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I know of a case where a father in this instance was fighting to see his kids, and the courts had given her the family assets because they gave her the kids. He was fighting to see them, but he had no money, and she spent 2.2 million euros over an 8-year period, which is like well over $3 million US, on legal fees. And he was in there for 8 years, banging his head against the rock wall that is the court when you're not a lawyer, trying to get to see his kids. And he just lost and lost and lost and lost and lost, and came very close to becoming another suicide statistic before he came to talk to us. And that's where, unfortunately, the courts do the most damage, because they give people the runaround like that. People give up then that there's no justice. And, my child is being coercively controlled. My child is being psychologically and emotionally abused. And the very court system that's supposed to protect my child is acting to enable all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had a horrific circumstance in Ireland some decades ago where perpetrators of sexual abuse against children were members of the Catholic Church. And because they were members of the Catholic Church, the courts protected them. And they, the standard practice was, if a priest was found to be a pedophile, having sexually abused young children, well, then he had to move from that school to another school down the country where nobody knew him, and he could start and do it all over again.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, there was never any punitive action taken against him, because he was a member of the church, member of the Catholic Church. And it was as though they were somehow above the law, and they were only allowed to be above the law because the judges thought that was appropriate at the time. And unfortunately, my great fear is that in decades to come, we will watch movies about the horrendous abuse that went on in the 1920s, the 2010s and the 2020s, which and people will be aghast at the horrors of, you know, a loving parent has their own children taken away from them because somebody tells a lie about them, and the courts allowed this to go on. And what they didn't realize, they didn't know, they didn't understand. Of course they knew, of course they understood, but it was the social norm of the day. And that is the excuse that the judiciary used today for what they were responsible for 30 years ago when it was priests being pedophiles.
Because, like, with my false accusations, I had to go before a CPS judge. I don't know what you called CAFCAS over there.
Kafka's, yeah. The child protection, that's in the UK, but yeah, child protection services.
And they have their own judges. And so I had to go before him with my attorney. This is when I could afford an attorney, but he interviewed the whole family and I was last. But in the end, I was exonerated, which I thought, this is great. You know, I can get my job back. Because over here, if you have an indication of emotional child abuse or any other type of child abuse, you can't work. And so I'll make it quick, but I had child support payments and arrears racking up. But then I called work and I said, hey, I can come back to work. Well, within 4 days, I had another accusation of the same emotional child abuse. And I said, what is it? And the caseworker said, well, you took away his Xbox and you wouldn't let him ride his bike around the block. So then here's another expensive court date in front of a CPS judge who again exonerated me. And there's got to be something done with all these people that call in false accusations multiple times.
Yeah, and you know, the answer is there needs to be punitive action. It needs to be, well, you know, your wife or your ex-wife, Marianne, has been found to be exonerated here. Therefore, your claims were baseless. So therefore, you're picking up the tab for her legal fees. Plus, you're paying another 20,000 euros into the family trust for your kids' education out of your share of the family pot. There has to be something like that,
right?
Because otherwise, it's going to go on and on and
on,
on, and the kids will continue to suffer. And it's just a really sad reality, unfortunately, that's what we are faced with. But look, there's lots of people around the world who are working hard, yourself included, obviously, Marianne, to try and raise awareness of these issues. Ultimately, what will resolve the matter is you take away the money. If it's not in people's financial interests to drag out court cases in family law, if it's not in people's financial interests, if every case is allowed a maximum legal spend of $10,000 or whatever it happens to be, or something, I don't know how it would work. I'm not a lawyer, but there's got to be something put in place to make resolution and amicable settlement following a divorce the ideal. It's got to be something that makes it financially worth people's while to resolve the situation, rather than inflaming and exacerbating it, because lawyers are good at that, and that's how they pay for their kids to go to nice schools. So
right.
Such is life.
Yes, I don't want to keep you much longer, but how can people reach you if they have any questions or
if
things like
they just we're just redoing our website at the moment, so I don't want to give you the existing email address, but if they just want to Google Alienated Children First, that'll bring you to our website, whether it's the work in progress at the moment or the final one in a week or so. But they can get in touch with us there, and we'll be more than happy to help in any way we can. Again, we don't have any funding, so we're not equipped to deal with individual issues in a courtroom situation, but we can certainly refer people, and we're here to help if we can be of any service.
Well, that's great. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Stay strong.
Right. Exactly.
It's really tough. It's really, really tough. But you know, the one thing you can always do in a parental alienation situation is just somehow let the kid know that you love them, and just keep on knocking that message home with you. I have to go and mail them things from people that your ex doesn't know, so the mail doesn't get interrupted, whatever it is, just as long as the kid knows at all times that the estranged parent loves them and loves them unconditionally, they'll somehow get through it. And
That's
therefore,
good.
so will you.
And that's excellent advice. Okay, well, Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in the family courtrooms that in turn perpetuate parental alienation. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again and for another exciting episode. I thank you so much, Kenn Joyce, for joining me.
Pleasure, Marianne. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.